Good afternoon, good afternoon, good Saturday afternoon. This is Racism and History, Myth Busting and Truth Telling. I am your host, Carol White, and I am also your life detox strategist. Now, I know that people have a lot of things to do on Saturday, so we are going to get started. And this week's topic is fear and hatred are the root causes of racism. Fear and hatred are the root causes of all toxic situations. It is more accurate, I believe, to amend this statement to read that fear, which breeds and feeds hatred, is the root cause of all toxic situations. It is most prevalent in our country's history of racism. Ever since Bacon's Rebellion of 1676, when the elite gentry instituted steps to diffuse the anger of poor whites by giving them the appearance of being equal to rich whites in the eyes of the law. They also set up an atmosphere of encouraging racism and hatred for Black slaves. The steps they used consisted of, but were not limited to, restoring the right to vote to the white landless, lowering taxes, making land available to ordinary whites by opening the lands that had been cleared by Bacon's Indian expeditions. Slaves replaced indentured servants as the main workforce. Laws were passed that both reflected and widened racism in order to separate poor whites and Blacks and ensured that there would be no more alliances. Interracial marriages were banned. Slaves were prohibited from buying their freedom. So now slaves had to remain slaves. There was no out. White servants could not be whipped on their bare backs, but Black slaves could. Now, the elite gentry, now emphasized white solidarity against the ever-increasing number of non-Christian alien Blacks. This mentality has remained in this country ever since. Let's fast forward to the post-Civil War Jim Crow era, where incidents of unprovoked white mob violence occurred against innocent Black communities. Now, there were 8 prominent incidents that stood out, but I'm only going to go into a couple of them. The first one was the Atlanta race riot in 1919. In an effort to disenfranchise the Black vote, gubernatorial candidates M. Hoke Smith and Clark Howell used their newspapers to spread the fear that whites would not be able to maintain their current social order if Blacks were voting. Now, other newspapers published false stories about white women being molested by Black men. Now, the result of this was a 10,000 strong white male mob beating and stabbing Blacks in the street, just indiscriminately killing people. The death toll, 25 to 40 Blacks and 2 white. Now you have the Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma Black Wall Street riot. That lasted from May 31st to June 1st of 1921. Now you have to understand the Black Wall Street was an area that was home to Black businessmen, doctors, lawyers, realtors, and even some multimillionaires. Black Wall Street had their own stores, banks, hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, not to mention a thriving school system and upscale homes with indoor plumbing. Say their own law enforcement system. Black Wall Street was self-sufficient. Black Wall Street was destroyed after a group of men from Black Wall Street attempted to protect a Mr. Dick Rowland, a young black man that was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator where he worked, from an angry white mob determined to lynch him. This led to the looting and burning of Black Wall Street, which comprised 35 city blocks. It also led to the imprisonment of all Black Tulsans in a prison camp for 8 days. 800 people were treated for injuries, and there were 300 deaths. The Washington, D.C. race riots, and I think this is going to be my last one. The unemployed whites, I'm so sorry. The unemployed whites were very envious of the few Blacks that had low-level government jobs, and they were very upset over the influx of Blacks moving into previously segregated areas. Now, add to this a rumor, an unconfirmed rumor about a Black man having raped a white girl. And you have white men that got dressed in their military uniforms going through the streets, randomly beating Black people in the street. Not who they thought was responsible, just arbitrarily beating Black people in the street. Now, when the police refused to intervene, the Black population fought back. The result is that 15 people, 10 white, 5 Black, died in this riot. 50 were seriously wounded, another 100 not so seriously wounded. Now, I'm going to stop here with excuse me, my back is killing me, y'all. I'm going to stop here with the incidents of riots, because the one thing that we have to look at and that becomes apparent is that there's fear and hatred. All of this is fear and hatred. What's going on now, what we have with the Ku Klux Klan, that's fear and hatred. What we've got with white supremacist groups, it's fear and hatred. But specifically with the riots, the fear and hatred that they used was fear of unemployment, fear of not maintaining their social order, and fear for their white women. In most of these instances, you had the rumors of white women being hurt by Black men. They didn't have any, in most instances, they didn't have a name. The only one name that they had was in the Black Wall Street riots, and they had yet to prove that he had done anything. He was just accused. And this is how all of this got started. You make the poor whites fear losing their social standing. You make them fear losing the current social order, and you make them fear for their loved ones. And you have fear and hatred and racism. And that's all it really takes for you to feed a fear, increase the hatred, and there you've got your racism. That is all it takes. I ran across a quote because I know that there are going to be people telling me that I'm just race baiting and I'm spewing hatred and this doesn't solve anything. And the quote by an anonymous person, I found it in an article in the Chicago Defender. And here's the quote: "For anyone that has a problem with me bringing this information to light or bringing my perspective to light, it is a privilege to educate yourself about racism instead of experiencing it." Well, that's all the time I'm going to take up from you guys this Saturday. I want you to go out into this weather. It's getting better. Most of us are still snowed in. I know there's still some people in Texas that have to boil water and they're waiting for power. My prayers go out to you. For those of you that are still snowed in, the elderly and the infirm, my prayers go out to you. I hope there's someone that can come and dig you out if they haven't already. And my prayer is that we can sit down and calmly, somewhat calmly, talk about racism and talk about it to the point where we're coming to solution and not just going around in circles. I am Carol White, your host for this week's episode of Racism and History, Myth Busting and Truth Telling. I love you to the moon and back, and we will see you next Saturday for our final episode for Black History Month of Racism and History, Myth Busting and Truth Telling. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.